Welcome to the High Bar, your weekly watering hole for lighthearted conversation with people who care about culture that matters. I'm Warren Etheridge, your host and barkeep. I promise never to cut anyone off while encouraging all to think responsibly. Today, me and my guest, Brendan Kiley of The Stranger, will raise a toast to and the bar for suicide awareness. Living here in Seattle, Washington, I'm starting to develop a little bit of a split personality over the whole suicide issue. On one hand, our state is telling people it's okay if you're old and you want to die. And on the other hand, if you're young and you want to die, don't do that. It's against the law. And in fact, we're doing lots of things to prevent it. Today, I have a great guest to talk about it. It's the fabulous Brendan Kiley from The Stranger, who knows a thing or two and just wrote a great article about this very subject.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you thought it was great.
Thank you. And I'm glad that we're laughing already about suicide, because that will immediately offend some. And frankly, this whole thing started because of the Aurora Bridge.
Okay.
And you are well familiar with
I know the Aurora Bridge, crossed it just today on my way here.
It is Seattle's suicide destination spot.
Yeah, it's one of the nation's suicide destination spots.
Nice.
Yeah.
How many a year?
I wish I knew.
But we're talking about...
But I think it ranks number 2 after the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh,
As a bridge jumping off point in the United States. Yeah, it's a very popular spot.
And that is problematic for some. So problematic that they are going to build a system around the bridge to obstruct views to the tune of $4.6 million in this economy.
Right. Well, there are a couple of issues, at play there. I mean, one is it's not just the people who are killing themselves that you have to worry about. It's about the people below. I think people that work below the Aurora Bridge at Adobe, people who live in houseboats. There hasn't been a fatality because someone's jumped off and hit someone else passing by, or a car, but that is a concern. So you have innocent passersby who can be actually physically wounded by the suicide, not just emotionally wounded. And there's also the issue of bridge railings working as suicide prevention. There was I think it was Washington, D.C., had 2 bridges that were they were very close. They were just a couple blocks away. And one was a very popular suicide destination, and the other was not. And they were roughly the same height, so you'd be dealing with the same fatality level if you jump from it. But certain bridges develop a kind of magnetism, a kind of personality that draw people to them, like the Golden Gate Bridge and like the Aurora Bridge. So this one bridge in D.C. was drawing a lot of people who would come to jump off it, and the other wasn't. So they put up a suicide barrier on the popular suicide bridge, and there was, a lot of critics said, well, people are just going to go to the other bridge just a few blocks away, but people didn't. Right. They went to this bridge. The suicide rate on this bridge that has the suicide barrier dropped, and the other bridge did not see an increase in jumps. So it may actually be effective in preventing people.
But it's such an odd statistic to me, because yes, that's true, the bridge is the same height, and maybe there is different appeal, but we don't know who didn't go commit suicide some other way.
No, we don't know who went to commit suicide some other way, but we do know that they didn't take a means that was readily available to them and within their sight. I mean,
unlike America's most popular form of suicide, firearms, which are so hard to come by.
Yes, right.
But seriously, I mean, how you point that out too about the Golden Gate Bridge, is that they have to drive over another bridge to get to the Golden Gate Bridge, which would be equally efficient.
Yes.
But they go to the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, there's the documentary The Bridge, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that's all about the personality of the Golden Gate Bridge and how people drive all the way across the country to jump off that bridge.
Now here, and I'm really not being flip, but I really believe if you have driven across the country to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, it feels like there's been enough time
for you to
know that's what I need to do.
What do you mean?
That's not a spontaneous decision.
No, it's not a spontaneous decision. That is a considered decision. I mean, people, at least as far as I've never been seriously suicidal myself, but from the research I've done and folks I've talked to, it seems like a lot of people, they wrestle with this question for a long time. Right. There are some people who reportedly just sort of get it in their heads at a moment's notice. They're walking across a bridge, suddenly they jump. It's not premeditated. But
you
for
talk
most
about
people,
that. You talk about it in the article. You looked over the Aurora Bridge and had a fleeting moment of
Sure, thinking
all
about
the things you wouldn't have to think about.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to. There are all these, things in life, the small things in life that can be difficult. Suicide is many times an evasion. Not always, but many times.
But why are we stopping people? I mean, and once again.
So this is
Don't get me
bigger than the
wrong.
Aurora Bridge for you.
Yes.
So
well, I mean, there's so many issues here. One
Right.
is that if you want to stop people from committing suicide,
Right.
I'm not sure that $4.6 million on the bridge is the way to go. Maybe $4.6 million in dealing with mental health problems is the way to go.
You think so?
Well, don't you want to treat it at the core rather than the last minute?
Well, I mean, I think that.
Don't jump! I'd like to say, you're woefully depressed.
But how is $4.6 million going to target the people who are most vulnerable?
I don't know. Don't let the mentally ill out on the street.
Oh well, geez. I mean, that's that. You go back and exhume Reagan and yell at him for that. I think.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right, next show. We're
There we
going
go.
to Reagan's grave with some shovels.
No, seriously, but
And
aren't there better ways to spend money? I just find it hard to believe that in this time when money is tight, that the best expenditure is $4.6 million to build something to stop people at the last minute from preventing suicide. Is it really about stopping people from committing suicide, or is it about those poor people at Adobe?
Well,
And can't people who are jumping aim for the water?
no. Some people aim for the pavement. Because
Really?
Yeah, because it's more guaranteed death if you hit the pavement instead of the water. In fact, there was a girl. She was in high school or maybe even middle school, so quite young, like around 15, who jumped into the parking lot at Adobe, and her friends painted a big heart around right where she landed, almost like a target, which is a little.
Right. So it would have been better if they painted it beforehand.
Beforehand. Yeah.
Oh,
Don't
no.
do it.
See,
Yeah,
now that
see.
family is going to be after me.
No, I thought this was a family show.
It is. Well, it's a bar. Yeah, sure, it's a family show. Bring your kids. Drink up. There we go.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much. No, but I'm really trying to get to the bottom. Do we really want to stop people from suicide, or we just don't like the spectacle of suicide?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, suicide has been. I mean, they tried to illegalize suicide. I think the first attempts in the Western world were in Europe, maybe around the time of the Reformation. And it was a question of, they made suicide against the law, but how do you punish someone who's already dead?
Right.
So there were all these means enacted where if you were a suicide, the state would seize your property. It wouldn't go to your widow or your heirs. Sometimes the state would drag your body around in the streets and hang it up on a pike, and so you'd rot in public, and all sorts of ways of humiliating you and your entire family.
Right.
This idea that if you kill yourself, it is an affront to the state, because this idea goes all the way back to the Phaedo with Plato, and he's writing in the Phaedo, or talking in the Phaedo, about how suicide is a bad thing because the gods own our bodies. We do not own our bodies. Right. And this idea has persisted all the way until today, although at some point the state took over for the gods as owning our body. But the idea is that if we kill ourselves, we're somehow betraying our entire community by doing so. So this idea is an old one.
Now how is that? Because it seems like your life is the one thing you have control over.
Right, if you're going to be a sovereign individual.
Right. Why isn't that protected like privacy?
That's a good question. I mean, it's definitely a taboo in the sense of taboos. We get these sort of visceral, angry responses. There's the incest taboo, the suicide taboo. There aren't that many that are that serious, but there are a few. And I don't know, but it definitely runs very deeply.
Well, here's the thing. Don't sleep with your children makes sense because you're protecting other people.
Right.
In theory,
Right.
Suicide only impacts the one, right?
Well, if no man is an island.
Ah,
right?
Yes.
But I think that there's
I learned that on Lost.
No man is a weird island with a smoke monster running around inside.
Turn with a crank. That's amazing.
But, I think that there's a huge. The morality of suicide is something that I think that we're going to have to, as a society, think about more seriously than we have before. I mean, because basically we've just condemned it up until now. Right. And the Christian prohibition of suicide gets into some weird, interesting history where there were some Christian suicide cults way back in the day, and St. Augustine, who was busy sort of codifying what the Christian doctrine would be, was like fighting all these renegade sects with his mighty pen. And one of the renegade sects had suicide cults. And so suicide had not been something that Christianity Christianity had taken very seriously until St. Augustine showed up, and in an effort to discredit this one renegade sect, started writing all these condemnations of suicide. I mean, Jesus Christ himself might be considered a suicide in that he walks knowingly into death for the greater good. I mean, he sacrificed himself. That's the whole language of the Bible.
He had a whole lot of assists there.
He
there were
did
a whole
have
lot of Magic Johnsons walking around with him. Helping
That's
him.
true, but there's a whole Gethsemane, let this cup pass from my lips, can I get out of this, God? And God says, no, you have to go and die. And so he willingly walks in. Anyway, we're getting off track.
No,
What's
I think we can talk about that, because if you haven't upset the Christians, what have we done here?
Well, I was nothing. Our work is incomplete.
That's right.
Where was I?
Where were you? Well, you were going through the whole Christian history.
Oh, yes, yeah. So you're talking about suicide. Should it be the right of a sovereign individual to be able to kill himself? And I think that there's a spectrum of morality with suicide. I mean, we've had the Death with Dignity Act was passed recently, and that's a different kind of suicide than, say, someone who is schizophrenic and mentally ill, and killing him or herself because of some delusion, which is different from someone who's really depressed because they just got a divorce and lost their house and lost their job. I mean, they're all different kinds of suicides. Right. But in the past, we've tended to really just say, suicide's terrible, don't ever do it under any circumstances. Right. And I think the question's a lot more nuanced than that.
I'm with you, but I'd like, because it's not all one thing. I mean, I'm curious because we have the Death with Dignity, which essentially says that suicide is about a quality of life issue. If you get to that point, you need to check out. That's fine. But isn't it a quality of life issue for people who are younger and not, say, cancer-stricken?
Is it a quality of life issue? You mean for people who are horribly depressed?
Horribly depressed, mentally ill, psychotic, whatever it may be.
Possibly. I mean, that's a really controversial position to take, but there's a Death with Dignity group in, I think in Georgia, who have broken away from the main ranks of the, I mean, most of the Death with Dignity folks have said if you're cancer-stricken in great physical pain, right, then you should have the option to end your life in a relatively peaceful, clean fashion.
So that's okay.
Right, but there's this other group in Georgia that says, well, mental pain is as real as physical pain. Right. So we should give the support and the means to people who have been horribly depressed for years and years and years and want to end their lives. And that's really, really controversial. I mean, as if the Death with Dignity movement wasn't controversial enough, they've sort of stacked some on top of it.
Well, I think that's fascinating because, to me, I support the Death with Dignity law, but it does open up this Pandora's box of who makes a judgment as to what constitutes quality of life. When is it okay? I was more comfortable, frankly, when it was black or white. Suicide, illegal. But still, what's the punishment?
Right.
You got a ticket for that, Valley. Or a lot of hospital bills.
I mean, I think the thing with the Death with Dignity is I think you have to get 2 different physicians to sign off on the prescription. You have to have some counseling. I mean, obviously, you have to demonstrate that you are very, very ill and facing death imminently. And I think it's something like when Oregon's Death with Dignity Act was passed, in the following year, I think the statistic was like roughly half of the people who got the prescription never took it. Right. So I think just having it around is also kind of a nice safety blanket in a way. Maybe it makes the pain more endurable. Right. To know that if it became unendurable, I could end it. Might actually help someone sort of motor through.
Knowing they have that security blanket of death.
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds weird to us, the hale and living and drinking and hearty, but I think for some people, it's a very real, tangible question.